Hi, and welcome to another segment of Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Jim Shaw, your host, and I'm the publisher of the Lexington Colonial Times Magazine and vice chair of the board of LexMedia. Today I want to welcome Bob Peters, or Robert Peters, who is a candidate for planning board in Lexington. Bob, Robert, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you could be with us. Robert has lived in Lexington for 16 years. And he's currently co-president of the Drummer Boy.
It's a homeowners association board at Drummer Boy.
Drummer Boy. Okay, great. And you've been doing that for 10 years. Board of Commissioners of the Lexington Housing Authority since 2007, initially appointed by the governor.
Yes.
Okay, and former town meeting member here in Lexington. So you've been pretty active in the community.
Yes, thank you.
Well, you're running for planning board.
I am.
Tell me a little bit why you decided to step up and run for the planning board.
So I've been involved in housing issues in Lexington for quite a while. I live in a great property that was developed in the 1970s as a condominium in Lexington. We have some really serious development issues, I think, going forward. My neighborhood is one of them with the Hartwell Ave potential redevelopment plans. And I think the planning board is probably one of the most challenging offices, boards in town, because the workload, the level of detail, the technical aspects of the role, I think, are so challenging. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm well suited for that role in town. And
let me ask you, kind of as a continuation, we haven't had much change or turnover on the planning board in quite a while. Do you think that plays into the sort of, I remember at this most recent town meeting, there were some concerns about communicating with town meeting, and I don't know, a lot of people say sometimes bringing sort of a fresh set of eyes onto a project or something is a good thing. Would you agree with that? That's why I'm running in this race, yes. Thank you. I think that the planning board has multiple facets of what its role is in town, and really serving as advisory to town meeting, I think, is critical. But understanding what the regulations are, what the regulatory authority it has is, and working with potential developers to really get the best possibility and projects for the town of Lexington is really critical. Mm-hmm. We were talking a little bit about, before we started, about what you see as sort of a primary mission for you as you sort of try to get onto the planning board. And when you're out talking to voters, one of the things you'll be talking about is sort of the burden that's placed on residential taxpayers or ratepayers by sort of fostering and developing a better policy for redevelopment of the commercial sector? Right. I think that's where we have some real opportunities in Lexington, that certainly the developments on Hayden and Hartwell Ave have contributed to the town, but certainly on Hartwell the buildings are of a certain age and really are not necessarily up to what a Class A office standard is in the Boston suburbs, and the trends are that that commercial properties need a variety of amenities and really some mixed use to be attractive to millennials and others who are really new to the workforce and to some of the new industries. So that to bring that and make Lexington attractive to folks, we need to be aware of what the market is really developing these days. Right. Okay. So to be more specific, let's say along Hartwell Avenue, I know there's been, a few years ago, there was a big effort to raise the FAR, the floor area ratio, allowing for greater development along Hartwell Avenue. All the stakeholders were involved, the Chamber of Commerce, all of these organizations came together, went to town meeting, and that was several years ago, and nothing happened. And I was told, whenever I'm asked about this, that it just didn't go far enough. So now they're talking about as you're talking about, mixed-use planning for along Hartwell Avenue. What do you envision? What do you think that includes? Are you talking, when you say mixed use of, like, say, Hartwell Ave, are you talking about not just commercial or industrial, but you're talking about maybe commercial, like shops, housing?
I think we really do need to look at all the options that people need to have amenities if they're at work and they want to go out. Getting from Hartwell either to Lexington Center or to Bedford is really a lengthy trip, so that having amenities closer by, which I think would include some retail options, possibly some food options, and I think that we really should look at potentially allowing some housing in the commercial areas, and Hartwell would be ripe for that. The type and the scope of that probably needs to be limited. I think the town actually and the planning board did very well in the plan that they were working on. I think that we probably lost some momentum on that over the last year, and we need to get that started again. The challenge on Hartwell is going to be that there are multiple property owners, and the turnover and potential for redevelopment is going to be a slow process, so that once we have a plan that we have a large consensus for, it is going to take a number of years to actually see the results. But I think we need to be in the game, competing against Waltham and Burlington for where we can do the development to have it. That being said, as a neighbor to the Hartwell neighborhood, I think that whatever plans we do have to take into account the impact on the neighbors, the residential neighborhoods that abut the commercial areas, and traffic mitigation has to be a key component of any development going forward. Right.
So you see yourself partnering with the transportation department in Lexington, working with economic development, because I know over the past few years, the Economic Development Office, headed by Melissa Tentopoulos, you know, she's been way out front on bringing new transportation initiatives through Hartwell Avenue, working with the corporations there to try to mitigate traffic that way, and also over at Hayden Ave, working with Shire, which is now Takeda. They've changed.
Right.
So that's a big part of it, and and mixed use seemed to have worked in Lexington Center. When they introduced that sort of the new condominium complex that was above what used to be, we were talking about the old hotel.
Right.
And it did add a lot of charm.
I think it adds a lot to the center. It gives another option for people who want to potentially downsize and stay in town. And really, there are few people who miss the motel, so that I think that it really was
fair.
It was really an improvement for the center. What doesn't serve the town well is in some of our neighborhood commercial zones. I think that the one-story strip malls really don't add much to the character of the town, or really really bring a lot to the town, so that the potential for mixed-use redevelopment in some of those locations where feasible, I think would also bring some real benefits to the town.
Okay. Now, I'm going to throw it at you in terms of the recent decision by town meeting on Watertown Street. Where would you have come down on that?
I would have supported it. I think that we always have to look at what a landowner can do by right. If 25 or 30 years ago the town had made the decision to support a land bank, then we would have some other options, but at a cost and at some trade-off for some other options. When a developer comes in with a project on a particular site, something is going to happen at that site. So you have to balance what can be done by right versus what might be a somewhat out-of-the-box plan. And I think that plan achieved a lot, especially for our seniors, some of whom might be looking for an option to stay in Lexington and have the level of care and level of services that they need.
Right,
but with planning, it's always really threading a needle between what can fit in the site, what is acceptable to the community, and what is really economically possible for a developer to do.
Right. Well, full disclosure, I was kind of skeptical on the project, thinking that it was more bailout for for the golf course because they had gotten themselves in over their head.
They sure did.
And as a result, you know, we're now having to allow this big, large corporation to come in and build this thing. And you know, and frankly, you know, I just was concerned about the neighbors. What would you say to the neighbors there? I mean,
I think that it's always a challenge when you have a project that's going in your neighborhood, and it's really mitigating the impact on the neighbors as much as possible and achieving a project that really has benefit for the community at large. So it's really threading a needle, and it is a challenging thing to get right. And the developers come in with the asking for the sky because it's a negotiating tactic, and I think that it's really the obligation of the town and its various boards to get the best deal from a developer as possible. Once a property is in play, the likelihood of somebody walking back and saying, I'm not going to do any project here, is just so unlikely that something is going to happen on a site, and that getting the best deal for the town has really got to be the objective.
And I can appreciate that. National Development did say, just to set the record straight, they did say they would walk away. And they didn't.
Right,
There's an exception to the rule.
Of course,
yeah, there always is.
Absolutely, but I think that once a piece of property is in play, we're not making any more land.
Right.
The project, in some form, is going to go forward.
Right. Okay. So let's kind of follow that through. We were talking about the neighborhoods and the impact on the neighborhoods over the last maybe, well, decade and a half or so, maybe even a little longer. The number of tear-downs or homes that are being sold to developers and torn down has increased considerably. I understand these things happen. Again, full disclosure, my mother's home was sold to a developer and torn down. So it wasn't, you know, so I don't want to be the pot calling the kettle black. I'm a little concerned about the numbers of it, but having been faced with that, I understand that we have fiduciary responsibilities, some of us who are executors, to get the best deal that you can for your siblings. So sometimes you put it in a box. But there are times that it's done where, you know, you might say, wait a minute, can we put the brakes on here just a little bit and take a look at this? What do you think about that?
I think that that's exactly what the issue is, that we have folks who've lived in town for 2 generations or more, families who've owned property in town, and they have looked at their residence as their primary asset. And I think that coming back and downzoning properties is certainly something that we do not want to do. That being said, even in the 16 years I've lived in town, the streets I drive have changed tremendously over that time. And the first option for folks when selling sometimes is that the builder comes in and says, well, you don't have to fix this and we'll take it off your hands, and by the way, we'll pay you 5% over market. So it becomes a very easy transaction. It is a market. I think that there's little that we have in the toolbox to change that behavior. Right. And we do have to be sensitive to folks who really relied on their home in Lexington as being their primary asset.
Right, and property owners have rights. I mean,
absolutely.
They, you know, as much as you don't want to see it and you don't like it, I'm 3rd generation to live in this town, and it's hard to see, but I understand it, having been put in that position.
So I would add, though, that we talk a lot about in some of the mixed use building a housing component to get affordability. If there are resources and the right deals come along, it might make sense for one of our several housing committees to look at whether it would be feasible to make a purchase in those cases.
All right. Well, here's a question that sort of ties in your previous. Well, you're still currently on the housing.
Yes. I've been a member of the Board of Commissioners of the Lexington Housing Authority since 2007.
Right. And now you're talking about sort of looking for a position that has to do with sort of planning some of those housing issues. What do you think about introducing the idea? And I know we have some multiple family homes around, like 2-family homes that could service, like 2-family homes that are condos, that allows families to be able to afford, younger families to come in. Because my concern is those of us who have had children grow up here, we're foreclosing on their ability to come back to this
Absolutely.
community. And it's really, it's a travesty. So what would you say about something like tasteful two-family homes?
I think the two families offer a great option for providing a level of affordability that isn't the strictly affordable standard that we have at the Housing Authority and LexHab has for building housing that meets the subsidized housing index, which keeps us at the affordable standard so that we're not subject to the development conditions. I think that tastefully done and with a percentage or quantitative limit per neighborhood, I think that two families are absolutely a viable and desirable opportunity in town.
Now, when you talk about the limit or the limit that you mentioned about the affordability, which 10% of the housing stock.
10% or more needs to be
otherwise
indexed as affordable. Doesn't mean they're all affordable.
Doesn't mean they're all affordable. They're indexed to affordability, and sometimes it's a matter of if a development goes in, all the units get counted towards that number, which is, I think, for our community a good thing because it does help us reach that threshold.
Right.
Otherwise,
but it doesn't provide additional affordability.
It doesn't provide it, so it's a little bit of a it's misleading in some sense. And I was going to say, I see a big difference between affordable housing and affordable home ownership.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, we never really get to that because people say they can come in here, they rent, but when you're renting, you have this sort of mental idea that, can I put roots down because I'm transient, because something may happen, I may have to go somewhere else. I've seen it happen to my friends here in Lexington, and I know that's an issue. So that's why I'm sort of big on this sort of, because I think we finally went over on average $1 million per home, average price.
Yes, and I rented a house for a year before I had the opportunity to move to Drummerboy, and as our moving trucks were departing, the contractor was bringing in the equipment to demolish the home. So that, and it was a perfectly serviceable home that had been rental property for a number of years, but it was economically better for the owner to sell it and cash out. Right.
Well, good. The scope of the planning board, what do you see in terms of, I know they have a sort of certain, this is our purview. What do you see the purview of the planning board being?
So I think right now the planning board has been working on revising the comprehensive plan for the town, which I think is really very important work. I think it got slowed down somewhat by some of the turnover in the planning staff in town, but getting that initiative rolling and getting a plan that there is some consensus among all the stakeholders, which would be residents, town meeting members, and developers and folks that are in the industry, I think is going to be critical for setting the course for the next generation and what the town is going to look like. We make a development decision on a piece of property, we don't really get the opportunity for a second chance. That is a developed property, so that we need to get it right. What I think the planning board can do probably better than it has recently is really provide its advisory function for town meeting perhaps a little more clearly and really steer the conversation in that respect.
Right. There was a little confusion during the debate over Watertown Street, and I understand that because I guess there was a shift in the recommendation moments before town meeting or something like that, and it did cause a little bit of, I wouldn't say chaos, but consternation maybe.
I think that having a consistent message that town meeting can get behind and see the logic of, I think is really important. Yes, depend on.
Right. Let's see. You were talking a little bit about the something I wanted to bring up. I'm sorry, my mind is. People who watch the show know that. Center Streetscape. I know that doesn't necessarily fall under your purview, but you must have. I mean, the planning department has got to be part of this thing because it does. You have to make sure there's sort of uniformity and all that. I know that we finally come towards the end of the discussion. I know it's going to town meeting for a vote finally. There have been, and there still are, concerns about brick versus concrete and all that, and I'm not trying to sort of bring that back up, but Are we really going to see this? Is this really going to move at town meeting? Are we going to finally have a decision on streetscape in the center?
So I'm also running for town meeting in Precinct 7, so I will hopefully have an opportunity to weigh in on this. I think that really the center of town is the focus of where visitors come to. They come to the green, they walk through the center, and I think that's really our showpiece in town for really what is a wonderful historic New England town. And getting it right, I think, is a challenge, and I hope the project does come to town meeting and gets due consideration. I think that the issues raised about walkability and the impact on those with disabilities, because we all have I believe the Social Security Administration says that 1 American in 4 will be disabled or have a disability at some point in their life. So if you think about that, we really need to be cognizant of what folks with disabilities need to be comfortable and to be able to maneuver on public sidewalks and streets, so that
Right.
I think we do have to be cognizant of that.
Okay. We're getting close to the end. I just wanted to ask you if there's anything that you wanted to say that we didn't cover, and then I'm going to ask you to sort of make a pitch, if you will, or a closing statement about why you think you would serve well on the planning board.
Oh, thank you. I think that one of the things, a couple of things that I'm proud of in my service on the Housing Authority is really listening to stakeholders, being accessible to residents, and moving our meetings so that we were meeting with residents at their various properties. So rotating the meeting sites, I thought, was something that made a lot of sense to do. In addition, one of the things that we've done in the time I've been on that board was, for the first time since 1980, we built new housing. For Housing Authority built housing in Lexington, and it was 4 units of ADA accessible housing at Greeley Village. I think it was a tremendous win that it was financed both with town CPA funds as well as state and Housing Authority funds, and it was really a terrific project, and really put 4 new units that had an accessible component into Housing Authority stock. And one thing that I'd mentioned at one of our recent meetings was that our executive director should be taking a look at Housing Authority owned property and seeing where there might be other opportunities for additional construction, so that we can create more housing directly for the town.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you for being with us.
No, well, thank you for having me, Jim.
I want to wish you the best. We've known each other a long time, and I know you're a hardworking guy, and I think the town would be well served.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.